Yeah.
Right, so now that I've got the camera turned on, I've got James Kiely here, or Kylie. James did the GeoGebra course a couple of years ago and has nearly finished the Engaged Maths course. And sometimes when people who come through these courses say some pretty profound things or are doing some amazing things in the classroom, that prompts me to have a chat. And just lately I thought, well, why don't I record them and put them out as some content, a bit like a podcast. But I'm not sure who's interviewing who, but I just want to have a chat because James has got some pretty good ideas about teaching. So, welcome aboard, and don't know how long this will go for, but you were saying that there's something about the way you resonated with this particular Engage Maths course, and how you were saying how it was the first time you'd seen it, a direction articulated. But you can say it better than I can. So,
Yeah, I just thought that we tend to see when you teach somebody that the smarter people tend to learn more, or like we say the higher ability students, they tend to learn more in the lessons and they remember more
yeah,
from class to class. And that this was the first time where I saw somebody actually say that the student gap will increase as you progress through the unit, which is what I've always seen. And that requires you need to have some sort of way of solving that. And if you try and keep everybody together, that we're sort of restricting that. We're holding back more of the top end. If we look at it, I would say learning is an exponential process.
yeah,
And if we look at that graph, we
yeah,
can see it quite clearly.
yeah,
As it moves along, the curve is coming higher and higher and higher. You see what's happening. That
yeah.
in order to keep everyone together and progress at a linear pace, or whatever pace you're saying, there are some people who are going to be left behind, or some people are going to be held back. You're the first one to sort of say that I've seen.
Right. So we're talking.
A whole course on that.
We talk about dealing with student spread, right, within
Yeah.
a
Yep.
unit of work. Now, so I reckon maths teachers particularly, and I used to be like this 100%, are often fearful of allowing the students to spread through a unit. So I think it's particularly prevalent to try and teach to the middle, across the board, but I think probably more so with maths teachers. Why do you suspect that is? Do you have any theories on that? Or do
I think
you agree with that?
I think that's true, and I think it's a management thing. It's a lot harder to focus on multiple processes, and a lot of it is because the teacher, I think, is trying to take on too much responsibility. If you're responsible for what every single student is doing, and they're not taking on that load, it's a lot of things to focus on all at once. And until we have some sort of process for getting the student to take on some of that workload
Yeah,
and teaching each other, which actually ends up being better, it's hectic. It's too much to deal with. It's more difficult. I also think a lot of the compliance responsibilities that we have are more easily satisfied with the teacher-directed approach, because if they're asking us to document every single adjustment that's made, and you're trying to work with the student-centered approach, that then someone might say, well, why is this student not meeting the level that the government sets they're supposed to be at a certain
right.
stage level? And to say that would mean you'd need to call the parent, etc. You're supposed to call the parents, you're supposed to document this and document that. And it's a lot more work. And that's in addition to the extra change
Yeah.
that the teacher would need to make to learn that new process as well.
So can I just hold you there, because we've gone on to, there's two big ideas here. One, because
I've gone
you're talking about your, yeah. I know this because this is what I do. I go on tangents, and it's like it's hard to get what's going on. So you're talking at the moment about teacher compliance. I want to get to that in a minute, but before that, we need to. So if we go back to student spread, the opposite to student spread is teaching to the middle, right? And then hopefully having some sort of extension exercises for the faster kids and something for the lower kids. So you're trying to differentiate, but it's all hands on from the teacher's perspective. It's I've got to control everything, and the more it gets spread, the more out of control I get, because I can't be everywhere at once, right? This was my massive problem, and I think this is what teachers struggle with. But the issue here, and see if you agree with this, isn't the student spread. The issue is that in my head, I have to be teacher directed. I am in control of everything that's going on in the classroom. So the opposite to that is student centered. And you throw that at teachers, and maths teachers in particular, go, well, that's not going to work, because they need direction, they need structure, which I agree with. So the trick is, how do you have a student-centered approach? What does that look like, and how do you manage it? And if you do go a student-centered approach, the spread naturally increases. So how do you deal with that? That's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I did write down according to some of the prompts. So if I go through that, it's probably a bit smarter. I'd say teacher-directed learning, I take that as meaning like the whole class works on information that's delivered from the teacher on a same activity.
Yeah.
And that the teacher can't explain separate concepts simultaneously.
Yeah.
That sort of means the whole class is kind of working together so much. I think one exception to that is maybe that workshopping open questions.
Yeah.
Because they're not actually working on the exact same thing. They're sort of even though it appears as though the whole class is working together.
Yeah.
Which I think is very good to have. We come in as a class and we are all working together. It's good for the learning environment.
Yeah.
But it actually has sort of an exception to that, where it appears as teacher directed, but it's sort of a mixture of both. It's sort of that. If we drew a Venn diagram of what was teacher centered and student centered, that would be one example of a teaching strategy that sort of simultaneously satisfied both.
Well, the thing I'd like to say before you go on is, and look, I can't, in a conversation, we can't explain this whole process because that's why we have a 15-hour course. But but there are some misconceptions. I've written articles on this. There's misconceptions that a lot of maths teachers have, and about student-centered approaches, and that is that they lack structure and everything can go pear-shaped, and the kids have fun, but they don't learn anything.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is something that is actually highly structured, but allows the students to progress at their own pace, and it can be as simple as, and you've seen the work requirement scheme, a piece of paper with with like what we're doing every day, and then you have your teacher inputs, in each lesson, where you say, right, stop everyone, we're going to do this, or you 6 people over there, just listen to me. And this is where the mini lesson, this is how you handle the student spread, right, through the mini lessons.
Yeah.
Had you been doing mini lessons before the course?
Well, I think we sort of do that a lot, but someone's either ready for the concept or they're not. Because that's my next point, to go to the student-centered learner, like why I like it. I think it's I would approach it more as a proof by contradiction, that we have the learning as an exponential process.
Yeah.
And the more you know, the faster you can learn.
Yeah.
And that means that our higher ability students will learn faster as well. So the gap will continually grow. And the conceptual progression is individual. And you say we can define any individual student. They're either already ready or unready to learn a concept. There's sort of 3 categories. You're either that, or you either already know it, or you are ready to learn it, or you're unready to learn it.
Yeah.
And if you're in a situation where you're trying to explain it to all the same thing to all 3 groups at once, well, one group, that is a waste of time. They already know it.
Yeah.
One group, they're great. They're getting a benefit from it. And some other poor souls are already left behind.
Yeah.
So can a teacher-directed approach cater to all 3 groups simultaneously? And maybe it can, but that was sort of the question that I always asked people, and I never found a satisfactory answer to that. I still haven't. I think with the open questions is one case where, yes, it sort of can, but I don't know if you could teach all the time with workshopping open questions. I'm not sure that would be possible.
So just like, this workshopping, if someone hasn't done the course, they're not going to know what we're talking about. So open-ended questions, most teachers understand that they're quite powerful, but they tend to hand them out on sheets, or they write something up and then everyone does it quietly or whatever. But what we're advocating is, let's say you're teaching fractions and you know that students really aren't getting the concept of common denominators. They don't understand the point of it, and that therefore they're struggling with adding and all that sort of stuff. You can easily make up an open-ended question. Okay, here's 3/4. Come up with 5 different addition or subtraction questions that end up with the answer 3/4, right? And just have a go, right? So we're workshopping. Now, the point of the workshopping is that you don't let them go for too long, because you know damn well half the class aren't going to be able to do it because they don't have the concept. And the beautiful thing about this is that you can't answer an open-ended questions with a routine. You have to understand the concept in order for the students to be able to answer it. That's the whole point. So then you call them in after 30 seconds and see what you got. And in that workshopping, when you're taking the kids' answers and putting them on the board, some of those kids who didn't have the concept are starting to go, oh, now I get it. And then you let them have another run and another run, and that those kids who are getting it, you make it a bit more difficult, maybe 19/20ths or something as is their answer. And so you're workshopping this thing, and it's fun to do, isn't it?
Yeah. And sometimes it just progresses on its own. Some people, they'll come up with their own conditions. I also found it's good for some students who are a bit less confident. You can go around and see, they've got an answer, and then let them know that that's all right. Then we put that one on the board later. I found more and more kids were volunteering answers like from lesson to lesson.
Yeah.
And it started off, I made some mistakes with it to start with, but there was more and more buy-in with it.
Yeah. So look, this is
a good way to start lessons, yeah.
It is a great, it's fun to do, but it's great when you know that kids are missing a particular concept. Open-ended questions aren't normally talked about in that context. They're more like investigations, I think. But this workshopping of it, that's where I'm talking about hitting a particular concept within anything, and then you can do a little 5, 10, 15-minute thing and then move on to something else. But with a student-centered approach, you do need some kind of structure, and the work requirement scheme is one. It can be a range of things. I mean, obviously a flipped classroom can work, whether you've got a lot of video resources and all that sort of stuff. But it does take a different pedagogy to do it. And I think the reason, I wish more teachers would do that course that you're in, because I think it does lay out a framework or a roadmap to be able to allow the kids to work at their own pace, and to have the teacher handle the student spread, and it works pretty well. Here's the thing though, would you agree? So you obviously made a bit of I suspect you were doing a bit of this before the course, but when you saw the course, you went, oh, right, well, I've sort of been dabbling with this, but I didn't realise that this was a thing, this was a definite way to go, and it gave you
I thought this is...
gave you the confidence to go full on. Yeah. So,
because I was already trying to solve that problem, but this I saw as, okay, there's actual solutions to this.
Well, I stumbled across this. It was purely problem solving, 100%. 100%. Because I had these classes that it was a new school. It was late in my career, and it was a new school that was developing. That the oldest kids were only year 9, and they were pretty precocious. Great kids, but the work ethic, especially in maths, we'll do the work, but what's the punishment if we don't? That was the attitude. And I'm thinking, this is no way to learn maths. I need to how do I get these kids? And they wouldn't let me teach from the front. It was just too much kind of. And I'm not some teachers are disciplinarians. They walk into the room and everyone shuts up without them even. I'm not that sort of guy. I'm a bit more bouncy and stuff, and so I thought I've got to take myself out of the line of fire, and it was just this whole. I've never really done it before, but this kind of work requirements. How could I do that? Oh, I could use this, and it totally worked. But here's the thing. What did you find with your? Was there a change in the way the kids were engaged in the process of learning maths when you flicked more fully to student-centered approach?
I still don't think I've implemented it that well. I find the best results I've had is from the higher ability students being able to finally move ahead with and they seem to be the ones that are most able to take up the idea of self-direction and be in control. The better results I've found with the lower ability is more about finding a progression that they can work with that is more individual and especially when it's catered to what they like. So like I thought that metacognition assignment was a brilliant thing, and I thought, well, I might put the effort into doing something on motorbikes because those kids, all they want to talk about is motorbikes, and that seems to be going well for one kid, going extremely well. He even I noticed he took his worksheet home to show his dad, and usually just throw it in the bin as he walks outside or leave it on the
That's a buzz, isn't it? Because that kid will remember that. So I'd really encourage you to stick with it, because I absolutely stand by this mantra that there's something intrinsic, like when you give kids choice, when you give the choice within, okay, do 4 out of these 5 things, or it might be, even with textbook work, I used to say to kids, rather than dictating every question, I mean, sometimes I do that, but other times I go, like, you've got to ask yourself, what do I know that I know? If you're doing a block of questions, do a couple of the early ones, do a couple of the later ones. If you're confident that you know what you know, move on to the next block. And I had some kids that I trusted to using this method, and they loved it. They had the choice. Now, there's no difference in the maths they're doing, but because I gave them some ownership, the engagement goes through the roof. And the same with, some kids with that work requirement scheme. Some kids just like slacking off during the lesson, and I go, so you're going to have this you're going to have this, you're under control. And they said, yeah, I'm going to do a heap tonight. I'm just stuffed at the moment. And I had no problem with that, because the homework and the day work is all rolled into the one. But giving them that choice, that's when they can start taking ownership over the learning. And then if you can bring that out into more conceptually based stuff where the kids can actually get their hands dirty, understanding, so they're not just copying down the next procedure, doing 10 and moving on. When we can get the kids understanding what's going on, and then maybe even work out what the procedure should be, and flipping it around so that understanding comes first, again, that helps to let the kids have ownership over the work. And that's what in true engagement is. Engagement's not playing games and handing out candy.
Yeah.
That can help.
Yeah, that's entertaining.
And that can help. You don't want to be a boring old, fuddy-duddy in the classroom. But the authentic engagement happens when kids can have some control of what they're doing.
When there's genuine enthusiasm for the learning, that they're making progress. And you can see they're making progress.
And that's where the organic peer teaching comes in, because they're asking their mates and they're working together, and all those things. It can look a bit messy, but that's what learning is. So this is still within a very conventional framework. I'm not, there's other people, like, I don't know if you've heard of Peter Hutton, but I forget his organisation, the New Schools Network or something, but he's talking about throwing all this out the window, and it's all project-based learning, and the kids map out their terms work. And I'm all for that, but that's not my expertise. I'm working with teachers who are in the straitjacket of this is what we've got to do, but trying to create a need to learn. Now, so hopefully that covered a little bit of the student-centered stuff. Now you're talking about compliance and how you think the constraints of what you're, like, one of the reasons why there's still a pressure to go teacher-directed is that the teacher-directed method, traditional method, is easier to deal with the compliance issues that are coming down at you from above. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, well, if you just look on the NESA side, you can see their sort of programs where they've got a sample thing. In my opinion, it's far too much of complete. Like, you approach that from a perspective of someone who's teaching out of area, to pick that up and to try and go, okay, we've got to try and do all of this. It's all of the dot points and etc. Some teaching considerations, but you're trying to apply that to, it's one single document effectively. That person is going to go through that as quickly as possible. And you say, well, it's a lot easier to get that, delete everything there, cut and paste your syllabus content in there, write up some little overview of things, and then after the fact, write down all of the things that didn't work. And then off it goes in the folder, whatever, and then, next year, maybe someone picks it up and reads that again and tries to look at some differences they made. But that terrible program is used year after year, which is different annotations on there. And some people, if they're finding that, I think that teachers are going to prioritise resources to compliance, because if they don't do the compliance, they lose their job, or they're in trouble in regards to that. So if somebody is trying to do that, they'll focus on the compliance. I think the metrics that they have in terms of assessing people's programs, which is something that's written down on paper. So it's that old saying where someone taught all these things. These things were taught, but what was actually learned? Yeah. And that's not what they're focusing on. They're focusing on what was taught in theory. And it's quite common for some teacher, maybe the student gets 20% in the test. And they say, well, I taught them 100% of the things, but they've only learned 20%. Would it not be better to teach that kid 30% and have them understand all of it? Yeah. That would be a step forward. And that would actually be easier for the teacher. It would be, but then if somebody feels like they would be officially, that should be an adjustment that is documented with parent consent and other such things. A lot of people, even though I've heard many people say that you're supposed to teach the students at the level that they're at, but the syllabus isn't saying, the kid is chronologically 14, therefore they are supposed to know all of the stage 4 stuff. If they're working at an 8-year-old level, then they need to be doing those concepts to that, and that it's sort of, there's not enough. Sometimes we have some of these students that are put in, like, I had an example where one girl was a long way ahead in year 7. She was able to solve some quadratics with a square model and other things here. She was eventually got to the equations and was solving some of that. She found completing the square a bit too hard, so she didn't do that. But another girl in there who was, she was very excited when she told me the day that If this number here ends in an 8 and that one ends in a 0, and then this one here is going to end in an 8 over there. So just finally understanding the place value of units and tens.
It's an aha moment.
Yeah.
I mean, an aha moment is an aha moment regardless of what level they're at. Like you could, you could argue. I never thought about this, but you could argue that they all have, like a strong aha moment for your weaker kid is just as valuable as a strong aha moment for your kid who's solving quadratics as a year 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we could write this one off. Well, don't even talk to me because you should be here. Can I just? You said something. There was an email, or maybe it was in the course. You said people often there's confusion about expectations. That to quote James, thinking that high expectations means absolute expectations, where you think it means high relative expectations. Which and you explained that a bit. Can you talk about that a bit? Because I thought that's an interesting point.
Yeah, because I think that's just a misconception that people get, because it sort of came in that quality teaching framework was a bit before I came to teaching, but I was fortunate. I had a good supervisor. The first time he said, here's the quality teaching framework, and he went through here and he said the first thing that goes out the window is the significance, or those elements of relating it to the real world stuff. But high expectations, I noticed that one, and they talked about that all the time. People are high expectations. And I think I was always talking to my mum about it, because she's a school counsellor and she's got education experience as well, that people, they think it just means, they're supposed to be up here, they're supposed to be up here. But if they're way down here and they're never going to make it up here, then we can try and push them there, but they're going to fail. And then I see some teachers where one example is like, I set the standard up here and everybody they're down here and I've got my standard up here. None of them are meeting it. And then that teacher will then say, well, they're not doing anything. So they end up having the lowest expectations of what the student will actually achieve, because expectation is just about what you believe will happen in the future. I expect this will happen. I believe this will happen. Well, if the student is always getting something that they are unable to do, that is well beyond them, then they never achieve anything on there. That teacher ends up having very low expectations, but they talk about having a high absolute expectation. What I think we need is that relative. So we want everybody to improve. Based on where you're currently at, we want you to make improvement that's relative to your current progress, not you're chronologically 14, you need to be doing this.
So it's an expectation that the kid's going to learn, or that is learning, and that is invested in the learning process. Some things I think are the most important things are that you almost can't be measured. You know, as a teacher, that's going on, but because you can't put a 2.0 against it, or a 5.3, it doesn't get validated, right? But those things are the kids authentically engaged? Like, well, first of all, do they want to be in the room? Are they listening to you? Do they, then, like, are they learning? Are they learning because they don't want to get into trouble? Are they learning because they like learning and they like collaborating? That's really important. Are they making progress? Are they getting wins? Are they getting aha moments? Those things, are they thinking about their learning? Is there metacognition going on? I think those things. Because if you talk to any real expert that's outside of an education system, they'll say that we should be teaching kids how to learn and how to solve problems and prepare them for jobs that haven't even been invented yet. So anyway, we can argue that till the cows come home. Back to the NASA thing. I honestly suspect that if you sat down, had a beer or wine with one of the NASA people, I reckon you'd find that the transitions that you're making in your classroom are pretty much in line with what NASA would want to happen in the mathematics domain. That's what I suspect.
I don't think it would be an issue passing an order with that. It's more what people believe in the schools.
The problem then is the regimentation of the documentation of proving that you're doing the right thing. I think that's where, and the interpretation of what that means, I think that's what you're saying. So, look, I'm not trying to change the world with what I'm doing in the courses. I just want to give people a roadmap and another way for people who are open to those ideas. And I've never had anyone at the end of the course go, "This is rubbish," or "I disagree." I mean, there's obviously there's differences between how much people run with it, but they have to implement But people tend to be more and more favourable. So I've certainly appreciated your input.
Yeah, well, they're all solutions that work on the ground at a local level. They don't require any sort of systemic change. It's just something you can immediately take away and apply.
Yeah.
To an extent that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
And to the extent that the students take control over their own learning, then that's a simple way of putting it. If the teacher takes responsibility for everything, well, if there's only 100% of responsibility to go around, the more that the teacher takes, the less the students are taking. Well, the more that the students take responsibility for themselves, the less there is on the teacher, and the less stress there is, and the more, you said that before, that if the teacher's happy in the classroom and having a good time, then that's probably a good indication. Part might not be. It's not. It's. I think it's necessary, not sufficient, but it is a good sign that if you're not having a good time in the class, something's probably going on.
Did you just read my mind? Because that's not on the list. I sent you some notes. I didn't put that on the list, did I? About
no.
Right. That's exactly what I. Let's close our chat here. But that's exactly what I want to talk about. Is, are you finding? I mean, I'm guessing maybe a couple of years ago you were more traditional in your approach. But are you finding that as your approach has become more student-centered and you're allowing more student spread and you're using the techniques to handle that, are you finding that you're enjoying teaching more?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's a constant battle to try and get them to actually take that responsibility, but it does take the load off of me and allows for more freedom once you've got the energy. I remember we had a really good one time a principal came in. He could only be there for a term because he was filling in, but he gave a speech where he said, look, the number one goal we want you having is going home where you're not feeling smashed.
Yes.
Because if you've got energy, you can prepare good lessons, and then you have a good lesson, and then you go home with more energy, prepare more lessons, and say that's what we need to get. We need to get you going in to reduce the level of stress there.
I think this whole thing about teachers having fun in the classroom, and look, fun's not, you're cracking jokes all day, or I'm talking fun as a result of the kids learning and the fun that can happen when, like, some of the best lessons. I mean, it's a while ago since I was in the classroom, but I walked out of some lessons just shaking my head, thinking, how the hell did that happen? Like, we went on a tangent. I rode with the energy in the room. The kids were just really, really on fire with the whole thing. There's all this learning, and hey, let's do this now, and it was just off the charts. And that is what I call the ultimate fun, being a teacher, because you're rolling with the punches. You're co-creating this learning experience with the kids, but you're not in charge of the thing. You're directing the ship, but everyone's playing their role. And I think that's the ultimate. And I've often thought about making a course that's just called, have fun as a teacher in your classroom. Because it would actually contain the same sort of content as this engaged maths thing. Because I got to a point where I thought, conversely, that your worst lessons, my worst lessons were a direct reflection of me. This has gone pear-shaped. Richard, this is 100% your fault. You didn't get this thing sorted beforehand. You're barking at them now. You're pretending it's their fault, but it's not, oh, geez, how am I going to get out of this? And then I'd often apologise the next day. But conversely, when I was really having that fun, I knew that learning is really happening well. You could almost use that as a meter. How much fun are you having in the classroom? Oh, right, great. Well, there's every chance that the learning's happening well. I mean, that's very rough, but the opposite is also true. If you look at a teacher and they're really cranky, there ain't much learning happening.
Yeah.
James, let's call it quits there. Thanks for chatting. This is part of the Have a Chat series. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I did, yeah.